Welcome to Keep Going, a podcast about failure and success, hosted by John Biggs. Every week, we talk to an amazing person about a time they failed and what they learned. And remember, when you're going through hell, keep going.
Welcome back to Keep Going, a podcast about success and failure. I'm John Biggs. Hey, let's show you Judy Cadillac. She's a integration coach and leadership coach. You also work in psychedelics, which is fascinating to me. So I think this is I think what you've kind of hit upon is a really important niche, because you're working with leaders and also bringing them into a headspace that might be a little bit more vulnerable. Welcome, Judy.
Thanks. Hi, John.
Yeah. So tell me what you're working on.
So for the last few years, I've been working in the psychedelic integration space and working as a leadership coach. And something that I found with almost all clients, including myself, is that before we could really get into psychedelics or even really changing patterns and behaviors in leadership, I found that so many clients were really addicted to dopamine and these big dopamine hits. While I didn't call it a dopamine detox, I started using the first several sessions, getting people to clear some space from these habits so that they would have some space to be able to reflect on their own patterns and be able to get to know themselves better, to be able to change these patterns. And then I started noticing myself for the first time, I was getting addicted to my phone because working as a coach, a lot of my business is promoting things on social media, which is not something that I was really, I would say, addicted to in any way. I started seeing my own behavior changing based on when I was on social media and times of day and things like that. And so I started reading and learning about dopamine and realizing a dopamine detox can have significant impact on your brain and your functioning, even more so or the same as psychedelics can in some cases. And so I started reading. There's a great book by Anna Lemke, who wrote a book called Dopamine Nation. I started digging into that. I had been listening to podcasts, and I did my own dopamine detox in January. And that really opened my eyes in a huge way to the impact of the detox and how important it is. And it got me kind of excited to do this group challenge and really get people on board with it and trying it for themselves.
So at the risk of, I don't know, cannibalizing your business, tell me about this thing.
So what it really involves, the way I'm setting up, it's a month-long program. The reason I'm doing it as a group is I think that this is a tough thing for people to do, and having group support and other people that are going through it, I think can be really helpful. When I had planned to do it in January, it was originally someone put out a group challenge, and I thought, perfect, I can do this with a group. And then she backed out and didn't do the group. I got my partner to do it. And I will say having somebody in it with you is helpful because these habits are pretty ingrained. And if you're surrounded by people that aren't making changes, it can just be a little bit harder. So the challenge is set up as a month-long group challenge. There'll be weekly coaching calls where I start to talk about dopamine and help people figure out what their dopamine triggers are and start to set up their own dopamine challenge, what they will be eliminating. There is some built-in activities and things that I really encourage people strongly to do. One of the first things is to change a morning behavior, like not looking at your phone for an hour. I hesitate to say that because I just lost half the people. And the reason that's really important, and I learned this myself, I've always had a really tight morning practice, meditation. I never did look at my phone. I got little sloppy with it last year, and I started looking at my phone in the morning and started realizing I was losing all of my motivation throughout the day. And I saw a Harvard doctor talking about this first bit of phone in the morning, and he likened it to a lemon. And when you have a full lemon and you squeeze it hard, that juice is just coming out. The more you squeeze it, you have to squeeze really hard for a little bit. And he said in the morning, that's what dopamine is like in your brain. And if you go straight to social media, which overcharges the dopamine, it gives you a big rush. And then it just drops off, and the rest of the day you're kind of dripping. So one of the first things I've established for myself again, and as part of the challenge, is starting off the day with an hour of not looking at the phone. And that in and of itself makes a significant difference in the rest of the day, the motivation, the clarity. Dopamine is a neurotransmitter that we think of as being like a feel good chemical, but it's really the motivation neurotransmitter. So it really drives motivation, reward, and learning. And when you're overloading it with these, I'll call them cheap dopamine hits, but really big ones that come from scrolling or shopping, processed food, sugar, you're not able to really, your brain will automatically tone down your dopamine receptors so that you are at a lower level then. And so your brain's constantly balancing between pleasure and pain. So the higher you drive it on the dopamine side, the more you're going to kind of fall on the other side to balance that out.
Interesting. That I think there seems to be like an epidemic of the sense of failure. One of the reasons why I started this podcast is that people didn't want to talk about failure, but I think it's happened a lot. But I also feel the flip side of that coin is that there are folks who are out there who just feel like failures constantly. Could that be associated with this dopamine? I mean, it feels like if your motivation, if the brain motivated brain basically gets this message that you're done, you're complete, and you haven't really completed anything. What kind of effect does that have on the brain?
So that's a really interesting point and a really good point because I think, when I first started noticing this behavior with clients, I didn't really associate it with dopamine. I associated it with this somewhat like large fear that most people have with sitting with themselves in silence and their own feelings and what's coming up. I noticed when it started to happen for me, it was when I shifted into being an entrepreneur and I was sitting by myself in my office and not feeling like the things I was doing was working and feeling overwhelmed, and it became really easy to pull out my phone instead of feeling that feeling. It felt really easy to pull out my phone and start scrolling. But what that does is drive you further and further down that hole, because that will absolutely put you in a hole. And then at the end of the day, you haven't accomplished what you want to accomplish. And so the next day, and that's what creates that loop that is hard to get out of. Um, so the dopamine detox for me, I thought this is great because I had a lot of things I want to try to get done. And what I started noticing is really about 2 days into it, I felt like a completely different person. And I
Hmm.
had the motivation to complete these things that I wanted to do. And at the end of the day, I felt so good about myself. And it completely changed my business, my mindset, because it put me in a positive dopamine loop. And so, what I would say is the dopamine detox can sound scary. It's not about really depriving yourself, but it's about learning about yourself and what's important, making informed decisions, having an awareness of how dopamine's affecting you. Because 1 or 2 days into it, you become pretty clear on what's been holding you back. I mean, it's just very obvious. And then you can start to develop the behaviors you want to have. It doesn't mean that these things have to go away forever. It's just, I'd say, reimagining and re-establishing a relationship with those things that's healthy and driven by conscious choice versus unconscious pattern.
What other practices should people be doing? It sounds like that 1 hour before, 1 hour after waking, no phone. That's a good idea. But what else should we do?
I'd say, something as simple, we were supposed to meet an hour ago. When we finished, I was picking up when it got bumped, I picked up my phone. And I was like, no, I went out for a walk. I got
Hmm.
completely energized. 5 minutes into the walk, I felt really energized. Reading, meditating, something as simple as just setting small goals every day and accomplishing them. That is actually a big dopamine hit in a healthy way. So it's different for everybody, I would say. Like if you play music, playing music is a great way to, that's a healthy dopamine. It gets you in flow. The big hits to avoid really are, the things we all know: processed food, sugar, social media. These things are very much designed to attack our brain in the way that it works and get us very quickly addicted. And to your point, it's that cycle of the going back into a pattern that doesn't serve us that then makes us feel bad about ourselves, and that just starts to spiral.
Have you had any clients who have done a 360 in terms of mood, in terms of productivity?
I mean, what I found, and again, this is my first time doing this as a specific dopamine detox group challenge. I have had, I would say, the majority of my clients, when they first come to me, they don't meditate, they don't really have stillness or mindfulness in their life, I would say. We have started usually the first few weeks with some sort of behavior modification in those ways. and immediately people feel differently. It then opens them up to have these larger conversations and awareness about their own patterns, their values, because a lot of these behaviors really butt up against our own core values. And part of what makes us feel bad is we're doing something that we know isn't good for us, but then we keep doing it.
Uh-huh. Interesting. And
Yeah.
in terms of the psychedelics, you mentioned that you were doing a lot of psychedelic integration, and some of the people that you were working with were so addicted to dopamine that they couldn't even sit still for even in a situation where they're taking, I don't know, a couple grams, right?
I mean, you could sit still. Here's what I'd say: if you're heavy into dopamine, your journey, like a large dose trip, will just not be as vibrant. Your takeaways are not going to be as clear. So you'll have an experience, but I'd say the therapeutic benefit would be significantly different. A lot of clients that microdose. So before we go into microdosing, we start on some sort of what I will now term a dopamine detox, because I know the deeper insights and the ability to sit with them and feel comfortable with themselves. Psychedelics open you up. It's going to bring up a lot of emotion. And if you can't sit with that emotion without the psychedelics and without staring at your phone, you're not going to get the impact of the psychedelics. So it's almost like a tiered approach. Once people get past that first bit of the dopamine, they're much more open. And I'd say their insights and ability to move forward are much greater. And honestly, it's just consciousness. It's really starting to be aware and conscious of your own behavior, which in leadership is really, really important. And being self-aware and being able to sit with yourself and be comfortable with that is really important in leadership.
So is there a rule of thumb that you say, like, if you're a leader, don't get on Instagram, something like that?
I don't ever say don't do any of that, and everybody's different. I would say up until this past year, I had no problem getting on Instagram because it didn't pull me in.
Uh-huh.
And so, part of the dopamine detox is some exercises that we do that help people put some boundaries around the things where they might get pulled in, so that they have space to maybe enjoy those activities, but not in a way that is an overload. So
Okay.
everybody's different. Some people's dopamine overload could be something that seems healthy, like exercise. So when we do the group exercise, every week there's a lot of exercises that you'll do on your own to help you identify truly what for you are your triggers, and everybody will select which dopamine, what they want to pull back from. I would say there's hardly anybody in this country that the phone is not, a thing. But I would say the more you can just not wake up, if the only thing you did was say for an hour, I'm not going to look at it, and I don't look at it, and I put it away an hour before bed, those two things would make a big impact.
Uh-huh. Where should people reach out if they want to work with you on this detox thing?
So if you go to my website, it's judycadillac.com, and all the information to sign up is there. I'll be taking registrations for like the next 2 weeks, and then we start in mid-April.
I'm afraid to do it because I fear that I might miss something vital on Instagram. I might miss a picture of a cute dog potentially, or
There's a lot
like
of cute cats on there for sure.
a funny giraffe. I'm just really worried that there's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of stuff that's just going on in the world that I might miss
It
out on.
is.
So
Yes.
we'll see if I can pull it off.
All right.
All right, very cool, Judy. Thank you for this.
Thanks, John.
This has been a helpful little tidbit. Thank you.
All right. Thanks. Bye.
All right. This has been Keep Going, podcast about success and failure. I'm John Biggs. We'll see you next week.
Thank you for listening to Keep Going, a podcast about success and failure. Remember, Keep Going is entirely listener supported. If you're listening to this, please head over to keepgoingpod.com, where you can subscribe to the podcast for as little as $5 a month. This is a labor of love, and every little bit helps. Thanks for listening.